Since the day I was born, I've been going blind. I'm 1 in 4,000 and the first woman in 3 generations of my family to be born with a rare, genetic, degenerative eye disease known as retinitis pigmentosa. RP for short basically deteriorates the cells of the retina. And while it affects each person differently, most experience tunnel vision, night blindness, and a complete loss of sight. These changes occur over time, and in my case, I have 10% of my vision remaining, with distinct blind spots and constant flashing lights. You know those little red lights that you get sometimes when you shut your eyes and you're about to fall asleep? I see those every minute of every day. And you probably can't tell because I've done everything in my power to make sure that you don't know that I'm legally blind. Now, are you wondering what 10% kind of feels like? Do me a favor. Put your hands in little small circles like that. Hold them up to your eyes, kind of like binoculars. Try to look around. It's kind of what it feels like. And as a bonus, y'all look pretty silly. So when I run into you later, I won't be quite as embarrassed. So thank you for that. Now, this isn't a story about blindness, and it's not a story about overcoming a disability. This is my story. The story about how I deal with the reality of going blind. It's about my belief system of accepting inevitable change, preparing for that change, and coping with the fear of change. Accept, prepare, cope. Now, I was diagnosed at 16, but if I'm honest, I've always known. I grew up watching the men in my family become more and more reliant on the people around them. I watched my father have to completely reinvent himself after he lost his job at about the same age I am now. And while it's really difficult to see them struggle, it's even more challenging when you realize that their present is my future. And as an independent woman, a mom, a wife, and a corporate event planner, that prospect is pretty terrifying. Incredibly terrifying. So accept, prepare, cope, it isn't a life mantra. It's more like an ongoing daily activity that can go from accept to cope back to accept without even a moment of preparation. Some days, all I do is cope. But let me first tackle acceptance. Loss of sight is inevitable. I could slow the progression of the disease down by taking high doses of vitamin A, but I've made a conscious choice to lose my eyesight rather than my liver. I kind of need the latter to survive, and so in that equation, eyesight really just becomes a luxury. RP cannot be cured. It can only be managed. Now, I see some sad faces. No sad. This is not sad, because there are actually some really positive things about going blind, too. Right? So, for example, I have great memorization and listening skills. My trainer only makes me do 1 set of stairs instead of 2, and I always have a designated driver. There's also another dynamic here. It's being a woman, being the only woman in my family. See, I've grown up watching the men in my family become more and more reliant on their wives, and their wives being more than happy to be relied on. In my case, my husband tries so hard to remember to take my hand if it's dark, to wait for me as I maneuver around a new environment. If somebody needs my attention, he makes sure they have my attention. And I love him so much for so many reasons. But one of them is because he actually chose to marry me knowing that this was going to be our future. But then sometimes he forgets. And I trip over a curb, or I kick one of those damn wet floor signs across a restaurant, or my face violently collides with a light pole. And I don't blame him. He knows that I want to do as much as possible on my own. But I can't help getting a little bit of satisfaction when I have to go to the hospital for yet another black eye, and he has to answer those, "Are you abusing your wife?" questions. Because when you tell them that you ran face first into a parking meter, somehow that's just not credible. So I learned to accept more help from him and more help from my friends. I also had to learn how to accept more help from my coworkers, which was without a doubt the hardest ask I've ever had to make. You see, work is where you're supposed to be the most independent, and I take that so seriously. So seriously, in fact, that most of my coworkers probably have no idea, until they see this, about it at all. I learned how to delegate so that I didn't end up in swarms of people or a room under construction. I learned to not scream X-rated expletives when I ran into a desk or a door, or most memorably, an unmovable cement bench, no matter the bruises that I earned. I learned that the people I could rely on, who just take my hand and say, "Mel, let's go," so that I could achieve more, do more, and be more. So, accept, prepare, cope. So it's a little easier to wrap my head around acceptance when I'm focusing on the preparation part of the equation. So most days I spend a lot of time preparing in some way. Usually it's a short-term prep, such as figuring out the layout of a building or trying to get from point A to point B on city streets. I find that it makes me habitually late. Sometimes I'm just roaming around the first floor trying to find the stairs to a second floor meeting room. I've also learned that I had to prepare for the future. See, I'm not so naive to think that I can be an event planner for forever. As my eyesight continues to deteriorate, I know that it will be time to move on. So I went back to school. I got my MBA. I got my coaching certification, all so that I had another opportunity at a second career. And you know, depending on whatever that wanted to be. I'm starting to learn Braille so that I can continue to read. I work on my husband about living somewhere walkable. He works on me about getting a guide dog for him or me, I'm not sure. But all of those things have helped me to prepare for the future. Accept, prepare, cope. When you can't see, there are plenty of things to be afraid of, both big and small. I am afraid to walk in large crowds because I am slow. I am trying not to trip over you, and I'm trying not to trip over my feet and fall on the floor. Most people, unfortunately, don't have patience for that, and I have been called every name in the book. And I can tell you, after years of exhaustive research, bitch is definitely the most favorite. It's okay, because I tell myself that I'm a trendsetter, and I'm just changing the definition of that word. I'm also afraid to do new things on my own by myself. This summer, I had an opportunity to work in New York, a short 3 blocks away from the 9/11 memorial. I hadn't been back since 2002, and I desperately wanted to go. It took me 2 hours of internal debate, checking with the concierge, checking GPS, all to gain the courage to walk out the front door. And what I want you to understand is it had nothing to do with finding the memorial. Even I can see that from 3 blocks away. It had to do with the fear of physically injuring myself by not being able to see around construction or falling off a curb into traffic, or worse yet, a bike messenger. I'm pretty sure that they have a no mercy rule. In the end, I believed I could do it. I did it, and I loved every minute of that experience. Anxiety would be everywhere if I allowed it to be. Find myself in a dark room I wasn't expecting, terrifying. Having my wedding ring fall off my finger and not be able to find it, silly, but terrifying. Having to have one of my teenage daughters drive me somewhere after dark, not silly, terrifying for you and for me. And lastly, coping with fear is me standing on this stage, telling the world my biggest secret, when all my life I've been told not to for the fear of losing my job, my insurance, my choices, and my independence. We all have something. I'm certainly not special. Maybe yours isn't physical. Maybe it's emotional or psychological. Maybe you're dealing with moving to a new country, or you're dealing with the loss of a spouse or a sick child. I think that we can all thrive with just a little belief. See, I believe that acceptance of my limitations is not the same as resigning to them. I believe that preparation helps to eliminate unnecessary risks. And I believe that coping with fear is more than just recognizing the fear, but continuing on despite it. I believe that I've done what I can to prepare for the future. I believe that I've surrounded myself with people who love me no matter what comes next. And I believe that I'm up to any challenge with a little accept, prepare, and cope. I refuse to just exist in life. I will continue to take the risk because I believe that I can. I will experience everything that life has to give me, whether it takes me massive amount of preparation or it takes me hours to build the courage just to walk out the door. And I will experience it not by how you see it, but by how I see it. Accept, prepare, cope, and believe. Do more than just exist when everything changes. But do me a favor and watch out for bike messengers. Thank you.